yeah, maybe what I can explain to the people who might be listening to us is that basically we were in a film school where there were a few foreigners, but mostly it was kind of a Chinese school. It was a film school, and so what I wanted to say is that I was first in a class that has many foreigners that were studying in English, which was like the bachelor in English that the school was offering to all international. And then both of us, we ended up in the Chinese program of the school, which meant that we had all our classes in Chinese, and we had some classes in common. But you were studying uh,
Cinematography.
cinematography, and I was doing animation. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you managed to go from, being just a visitor in China to being someone who can study all your classes in Chinese?
Well, I think an important thing to note there was that at the start, I was not somebody that could study in Chinese. I think even after that language course, I remember of our university experience there, especially in our first year, that we would have usually the three of us or four foreigners in this class, and we'd come out of the lecture, all of having had a fantastic time of 4 hours spent in the lecture hall. We'd all come out with a very different interpretation of what the homework was. I would think that we had to film a 3 minute short film. Someone came out thinking it was a 5,000 word essay, but it was a really fascinating insight into confirmation bias. I think that everyone had somehow taken something that they needed or wanted to hear from this lesson. I think it's sort of probably how astrology works, is that you have all this information and you sort of imbue it with your own meaning. So yeah, that's an important footnote. I mean, certainly your Chinese was a lot better than mine by that stage. So I think you probably did know what homework was. It was me that was getting that all wrong. Um, but in terms of yeah, landing in Beijing and being able to function at that basic level. So I had done a few Chinese classes as early as school, actually, and then I had studied Chinese as my undergraduate degree in Edinburgh, where I had an amazing time, but I didn't really learn any Chinese at all. Yeah, so I think I finished a 4 year degree in Chinese, and I think when you're learning Chinese outside of China, there's a real emphasis on the written language and your calligraphy and your stroke orders. And obviously, when anyone's trying to learn a foreign language, that is not the part that interests you. I think it might have been the way that I got into Chinese in the first place, with its pictorial elements and the allegory that you can build into a language that is pictorial as opposed to the English alphabet. I mean, you think of the wordplay that can happen within English, and then you make those words into characters and their pictures, and you can think of all the illusory potential that they all have. And I think that was something that attracted me to Chinese at the start. Um, but yeah, I think fast forward to having completed an undergraduate degree in it, I could hardly speak it, and we all our exam infrastructure was based around writing. So I discovered I couldn't really speak it at all. I didn't know any of the intonations, which for any sort of non-Chinese learners listening to the podcast is so important. Um, and I sort of imagined it wasn't. I remember the first time coming out on my year abroad, and no one could understand the word that I said. And I ended up writing down sentences in order to communicate, which was ridiculous, really, with the effort that it requires to learn, 10 Chinese characters when I could have just said it. And I was sort of writing people notes like how to get to the train station. So it was a really ridiculous part of my life. And then yeah, after 4 years, I realized I was still bad at the language, and I thought, you know, one way to make sure I would have to be good at it is to do a master's degree taught in it. One of two things can happen. I either have a great time, like I did my first Beijing experience, and come away with some great friends, but no real language ability, or I come away being able to speak the language a bit better. And I think that's something that we did manage to do, luckily.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I had a similar experience. Then, the first few months of learning is like basically you're able to read characters, but you are not yet able to communicate with people just because you don't have the tones, and yeah, you don't know how, you're not fast enough maybe with like, uh getting all the characters together. But it's interesting. I didn't know that you had taken classes before coming to China. And do you remember like originally what triggered your decision to take these Chinese classes?
I think I answer this question differently every time that I'm asked. I think it came out of being rubbish at European languages and really wanting to learn one. And I just thought, if I start a language from square one and I start a language that no one has studied before amongst my classmates, then at least I'm not as far behind as I am with, say, French or Spanish. And I'd heard, I guess, that it appealed to sort of a more mathematical mind and the algebraic quality that people said that Chinese grammar has. Uh, and I'm not sure I agreed with that really. I'm not sure how algebraic Chinese grammar is. I mean, the grammar is brilliant because you can form the same sentence any number of ways. It's not as sort of rigid as our languages here. So um, yeah, and I think just the potential of the language. I think also just reading, 20th century sort of English literature and or throughout sort of the history of English literature, there's this consistent frustration with the inadequacy of language to describe things. So, the more adjectives you use to describe a certain thing, um, the more abstract it then becomes. It's the classic case of less is more. And with Han Dynasty poetry, for example, you have four characters that can be translated into whole paragraphs. And I think that was the real appeal. I think that's where it started. But yeah, I think the sense of adventure as well that China offers. And I always get this wrong, but what's the one where I can say this in Chinese because it's easier. You just say blind people touching elephant, but is it Occam's razor? You'll be able to tell me, but you have the blind men feeling parts of an elephant, and one thinks it's a snake because he's got the trunk, and one person's got the leg and thinks it's a tree, and um, it just makes sense that a culture so different from your own is one that you can learn more from. So I think that was a big factor in me wanting to have a sort of Chinese experience.
Hmm, I see, I see. And so you also mentioned the pictorial aspect of it, and I cannot help but making a link between your major, like the fact that you're studying cinematography, and this the visual aspect of Chinese. Um, is it something that sometimes comes into your mind in terms of how you how you want to say a story, or like you would be maybe thinking of the way that the Chinese characters are shaped and the way they represent the world? Is it something that you have ever considered, like in terms of let's say like the storytelling aspect of the Chinese language, if that makes sense?
Um, yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's not something I'm actively conscious of. I think everyone loves stories, and I love that within characters themselves are embedded stories. And for example, the character Dia for home, you have, I don't know why I've said the English word in the Chinese tone there and not the Chinese. But you have the roof particle on top, and then you have the old character for pig underneath. and tells the story that you used to live under the same roof as your pig because it would be your most valuable asset. Just small sort of trinkets like that are fascinating, in the same way that I think that shopping malls are the most depressing place in the world because at one point they didn't exist and the next day they did, and you walk through them and there are no sort of cultural relics from a time going by. There's no life there, I think. And Chinese is a very lived-in language in that respect. It has all the scars of its cultural past.
Mm. This character, like Jia, is an interesting one because it's you would probably ask like yourself like, okay, so does that mean that everyone it would have, like a individual house with your own pig, and then it becomes your house just because you have a pig underneath? But I think it came from more of a, a moment in time in China where like everyone was living in like these big places, and especially like the Tulo, like, these big circled houses where basically you would have like floors, and one floor was for the animals, like the lower the bottom floor was for the animals, and then you'd have all these people gathered around in the upper floors. So it also shows like the cultural aspect of how people used to live, and it was not like the way you could think of, the European way of each peasant having his own animal or his own cattle, but it was much more of like a big group of people were gathered under the same roof.
I didn't know that. Thank you. Yeah, yeah, but yeah, I guess even in the so yeah, that there's sort of an inbuilt sense of collective there as well, which I guess you maybe have within the grammar system that you start with large things and then move backwards in the way that you sentence the structure a sentence even.
Yeah, exactly. And something you also find like when you say, listen up, everyone, then you say 大家, you say big family, like a big family, listen up. It's like the kind of thing that brings you back to this kind of time and age where, yeah, people were living as big group. To go back to your first experience, you said in 2016 when you first came to Beijing. And then can you tell us a little bit of maybe the how long you stayed the first time, and how maybe the memories that you have from these moments, and also the trips that you did in your first chapter of your Chinese experience?
Yes, of course. So I think I'm trying to work out the first year that I came, but I think I first would have gone after my first year of my undergrad, which I think puts us in 2014. And that time, actually, I was teaching English in a primary school outside of Wuhan, which until recently was a city that not many people in the West had heard of. But that was a brilliant experience, and I really didn't have much Chinese then. And there are a number of things that were just mind-boggling, really. And I think it's the moments that you miss or the moments that you forget when you've been in China for a long time. So the reason that I would love having people come to visit me in Beijing is you're reminded of all the things that took you back the first time. But even once you've lived in China for a few years, there's something that happens to you that seems anecdotal every day. It always seems to surprise you in very bizarre ways. I'm not sure if you told the story on the podcast, but I believe you had the trip where you were asked to be an Italian architect. That I think
The
I'm not sure.
Italian actor? I don't remember that.
Maybe it wasn't
I
you, but I think someone was flown out to a city to either be a French or Italian architect, and that they told this prospective employer that they didn't speak the language that was required, and they said, "Don't worry, just don't speak. Then we just need you to be a foreigner in a suit, and you're going to help us gain an investment for our project." And
it
China.
was not. I didn't get the Italian one, but I got the British one. I got this guy, this Chinese director who approached me and he said, "You remind me of Harry Potter." and I would like you to be in my movie. And then I say, okay, it's like the very first time in my life that I'm being told that I look like Harry Potter. And then he gave me the script, and it was mostly lines in English. And then I explained to him as like, I don't know if I can do it well. I don't know if people will believe that I'm from the UK. And he's like, no, it's completely fine. We don't we don't we don't care at all. Like just do the lines. And it was just, some very I it was mostly, not even like lines of dialogues. I was just reacting in a very burlesque way to what was happening because I was meant to not be able to understand Chinese. So I was just, the lost European and lost in China.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and lots of people end up with crazy anecdotes like that. I think I'm the voice of an Australian sat nav, so apologies to to anyone that's bought a Chinese sat nav device who's currently listening from over there. Um, but yeah, to go back to your question, yeah, so I was teaching in Wuhan. I remember my first week there. At one point, the whole class stopped. Nobody would speak to me. I had a class of 40 children, and they were all on benches of four. And one of the first things that I was tasked with doing was giving them all English names. And I had the genius idea because they were all sat in tables of four, and often it was two boys and two girls. I went through and the first table I named them all after the Friends cast, which seemed obvious. So I had, Chandler, Joey, Rachel, and Phoebe. And as I went through, because I was naming 40 kids, I predictably I ran out of TV shows. And I had a disaster where I got to a group of two girls and two boys, and the first two I named Daphne and Velma. And then I realized that I had to name the next two Shaggy and Scooby. And so somewhere out there do exist probably two young adults called Shaggy and Scooby. But yeah, at one point they, including them, that they all stopped and started doing their eye exercises, and I had no idea what that was. And there was Chinese coming out of the PA system as happened. So, yeah, it's this mandatory part of Chinese primary school life, even secondary school life, I think, that's existed during the Mao era. That yeah, a lot of listeners will be aware of. But I think it's 10 minutes or 5 minutes. It's quite a long time because a lot of Chinese kids end up with bad eyesight, maybe to do with the work ethics involved, maybe just for genetics, but they just rub their eyes for a while. I don't think it's backed by too much scientific research, but I remember that they also started doing that, and no one would. No, they were all so intent and rigorous in adhering to this to this timeout that I had to just wander into the corridor and find another teacher to find out what was going on. So it was a sort of strange experience, and we were in a small town, and I rented a moped and drove around. And on my second day, I got invited to a wedding, just that was happening on the side of the road. Sort of pulled up and made to give a speech. I think I only really knew how to say thank you, but predictably went down well. Um, and I traveled then after I finished my teaching job down to Hong Kong. And I think I went via the Three Gorges Dam and via Yangshuo as well. And yeah, onto Hong Kong. And I remember I accidentally booked, I thought I booked a sleeper train, but I'd accidentally booked a 16-hour train journey on on a seated train. And for anyone sort of not familiar with the Chinese train system, it's a bit like that scene in Titanic when they get in a lift and you slowly see the change in classes, I suppose, as you go down. And if you go into one of the seated carriages at nighttime, it's mostly the manual laborers there with big sacks of farm produce. And I walked in there, and there was a lot of alcohol being consumed, and there were card games happening, and there was this big raucous. And I stepped in, and it went deathly silent for a few seconds. And then I got summoned over, and I think sort of asked to drink a shot of baijiu or something, the rice wine. But the worst thing about that journey was that we had a man selling us stuff for 10 of those hours. And he was selling all these household products. One of the things that he tried to sell us, and my Chinese was good enough to understand this, he was selling toothbrush, and he said it was compatible with all types of toothpaste. So he was just paid to speak for 10 hours, and it was so frustrating because, I mean, Chinese people do enjoy capitalism. I think it's like the buying and selling is a big part of the culture, and people were just interested for the whole 10 hours. And I was very cross with them, I think, because I wanted them to pay him no heed, and then he might have gone away. So yeah, those are, I don't know, a very random smattering of my first China experiences, but I think they all link back to the basic things of Chinese people being probably the most hospitable that I've ever met. And the organized chaos, the almost undescribable, I guess, just that sense of adventure that's linked to not really knowing what's going to happen next if you just say yes to everything that's offered to you.
Yeah, and I feel like what you're mentioning it brings us back a little bit to the character we mentioned earlier with the Dajiao, like the fact that you're sharing common space with a large group of people. And
Mm.
it's true that it's something that you can notice quite fast and when you arrive in China is that Chinese people don't have the same relationship to individual space. And then sometimes it's for the best. It can also be for the worst. But yeah, in this kind of train, I'm sure that you have noticed that yeah, everyone is quite close to each other, and like the things happen, and everyone gets into the same activities, and there's this like big sense of being part of the same group. Um, and to kind of bounce into this idea, what I wanted to explain also a little bit is to try to describe um, the condition of living in the dorms, because we were staying as like foreign students. We had like a private building with all the people that came from abroad, and we were staying basically like two people for one room, which was pretty amazing conditions when you were to compare that to the Chinese dorms, where you would have like maybe four to sometimes five or even six people in the same pretty much the same space.
Yes. Um, I think it came as a bit of a shock having to share a room, but yeah, you're quite right. As soon as you compared it to the alternative, yeah, we felt quite lucky, I think. And there were reports of other universities I know that had curfews as well, and as master students. And yeah, when you compare that from the sort of Western undergrad experience of, like mixed genders even on the same floor, then yeah, it felt pretty stark.
Absolutely. And can you tell us a little bit about your years living in the dorms in the film school? Is it did you have any unexpected roomies? I remember that for me personally, yeah, like at first you didn't get to choose your roomie, right? Like you ended up with someone that you didn't know, and then you just you just share you just share your daily life with that person.
Yeah, so he was Australian. Yeah, he was an Australian passport holder, but he was ostensibly Chinese. I mean, I think
Mm.
he had grown up in China and but moved over to Australia between the ages of 12 and 17, I think. So his English was very good. It wasn't native speaker good, but we could speak in either language, which was great. But I remember a really telling moment where his girlfriend was in our room, and at one point she referred to him as "you foreigners." I think she was telling him that you foreigners don't understand this certain thing. And I think that was a realization that the barometer that you need to fulfill in order to be seen as a Chinese person by a Chinese person really spoke to our sense of living in China as foreigners and reaching a decent level with the language, and sort of wondering at what point do we, be start to seen as equals, I suppose. And I think that was a refrain that was repeated to us during our time at Beijing Film Academy, is that you can't film Chinese film, 中国电影. And but at no point was that really defined. We were never told what Chinese film was, or why we couldn't do that. I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, in terms of dorm experiences, I don't have any particularly good anecdotes for you. I had quite a pleasant time. Um,
Do,
but I've got one actually that I went back last year, which you might not know.
oh no, I didn't.
Yeah, so I left in January 2020 when COVID kicked off because I was scared, and I left like a coward, thinking that I would leave for 2 weeks whilst COVID blew over. And that obviously didn't age well, but I left in a hurry because I was scared. And I packed a rucksack with probably three spare pairs of pants and a t-shirt and my laptop. And I left. And after 1 week, the borders closed and they wouldn't let me back. And they didn't let me back for 4 years until last year. And when I went back, and a fun game you can play, I think, if you're visiting China for the first time, is look out for all the pointless jobs because I think China very much prides itself on having a very extraordinarily low unemployment rate. But that does involve employing too many people to do one job. And you often have four people working on buses, for example. You get told the next station in perfect Mandarin, and then it's someone's job to then shout that right into your ear in incomprehensible dialect, just for good measure. That's one of my favorites. But typically, our international block at university, that really no one had lived it for all this time. They had kept on the full retention of cleaning staff and the receptionists. And I sort of got to reception hoping for a hero's welcome. I think I got a slight raise to the eyebrow as I was backing on through. But the cleaners had come in, and it's obviously not within their remit to tidy, they're just there to clean. So someone had dusted around all of my stuff, which was all, it was scattered over the floor. I left it like a bomb site. But it was perfectly crystallized in time. I was entering my own time capsule that had been lovingly kept in the same condition as I had left it in. But I originally thought it was going to be quite a fun experience to sort of go in. I was going to film it because it would be quite interesting. But as soon as I walked in, it was scary, honestly, because you're being confronted with yourself 4 years ago. And I think most people like to imagine, or at least I certainly did, that I've been the same person since I was 18. But because you're with yourself every day, you're not really aware of the changes to your own character. And I think, especially during lockdown, where all I'd really done was sort of sat at home and stare at a wall for days on end, you wouldn't have thought that would have been too conducive to personal development. But I walked into this room and I didn't recognize myself in a lot of it, but I had books open and on the page that I was reading them. I had my lecture notes from the week before, which I struggled to understand without a Chinese dictionary, without Pleco up on my phone. And you have all these trinkets of memories that you might otherwise have forgotten about. So yeah, I don't recommend entering your own time capsule is my, if you're going to take anything from quite a long-winded story, it's to not do that. Because I think nostalgia is it's probably the most complex emotion. It's always tinged with a slight sadness. So confronting that head on, I think, was quite a tough thing to do.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that because I still have to go through my own time capsule because my stuff are still in the dorms and I haven't got I haven't gone back yet and yeah it's quite a moment and the fact that this happened to us like so abruptly, and we were, yeah, we were used to having this daily life, and then suddenly your life changes completely. And now my stuff are hidden because, like, the teacher in charge of the dorms, he didn't want to have the stuff like for too long in the dorm. So what I did is I asked one of my friend to put the most valuable items in one of these closets that we have in the corridor of the dorms, and that no one ever opens. I mean, I hopefully they don't get open too much. And so I put basically most of my, yeah, most valuable items in there, and hoping that when I go back, I will be able to find them. But yeah, it's also a moment that I kind of I'm a bit reluctant to confront, because yeah, it's, as you said, it's like you don't know exactly what it's gonna bring back from the past. And um and I felt a little bit like you when I left, because I left only like 2 or 3 weeks after, maybe January 15, which was, I think January 15 was the moment where the official news came out that it had gone for a few months. I think it started a few months earlier, but I think January 15 was the first moment that we kind of pinned down the word of, the pandemic was, I think the city of Wuhan was being shut down. And so after this January 15, I stayed only 2 weeks just in the dorms, and, living, just being able to go to the dorms, having my temperature checked all the time, and just go like to the canteen like twice a day, eating the same food. And after 2 weeks, I just couldn't stand it, and I had my family saying, "Yeah, you should definitely come back." And the Air France, like the biggest airplane company, was not operating anymore, so I had to find a plane to go to Russia first, and then change in Moscow. And so it was this kind of moment where most people had already left the dorms, but I was with Ale. I was one of the only one left, and then he chose to stay, and I left. And very quickly, after a few weeks in France, in Paris, I had this huge regret of, I was thinking, oh, you should have stayed. You should still be in China. You should be fully enjoying the Chinese experience. And now there's no foreigners in China, so it's like you're gonna have even more of these crazy opportunities, and China is back on track now. Now I was seeing, documentaries with people having huge parties in Wuhan, and like these big clubs, and then at the same time in Europe, things were just starting to be completely under lockdown. So yeah, during, I think, a few months, I think it took me a long time to just get over this feeling of regret, and having the feeling that I had missed a huge turn in my life.
Hmm. How do you see that now? Am I allowed to ask you questions as well?
Of course, of course, of
So
course.
do you,
Uh,
yeah, do you still think that might have been the wrong decision moving back to France when you did?
I think it's only after I started enjoying my life in Montreal. So it's been only, I would say, maybe 2 years, 2 years and a half, that I am getting more and more convinced that it was the right choice, even though it didn't feel like, taking a choice at the time. It was a bit like you, it was like a reaction to a feeling of fear, of unexpected things happening and stuff. So it was not so much about making a choice, but now that I have experienced the life here in Canada, and just seeing more of another way of seeing, life balance here people tend to finish work much earlier compared with Europe. In Paris, we tend to keep work and keep to finish work around maybe seven in the evening, which means that you don't have any life after your work. Just experiencing, another life balance outside of Europe, and one that is not the one that I knew from China, and having my kind of a more of an adult life, because I was only living as a student in China. Now that I see that, I realize that uh, China is probably the most wonderful experience that I've had in my life as a young adult, as a student. But then when you think of living in China as a young adult, trying to lay some steady foundation, try to maybe build a family, trying to maybe, have your kids sent to school there, like all that, all this kind of like extra layer that doesn't only involve you, but involve like the the next chapter of your life. I feel like it was probably a blessing in disguise to be able to see another way of living that kind of opened my eyes that probably I would not have been able to see if I had stayed in China.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really mature way of looking at it. I think I definitely struggled that first year being back when everything was still going ahead in China. And it was like if ever in times of narcissism you've wondered who would cry at your funeral. It was like watching my funeral and no one crying because I had these projects that I was signed up for as a cinematographer for my work, and because I couldn't get back for them, they were then replaced me and the projects went well. And I had this pent up sense of urgency to be getting on with my career and getting on with my life, but obviously nothing to channel it into. Um, but I think certainly, and then I think since I was back, I was conscious of the fact that I'd moved back against my own will. So I think just, and that's just part of my own personal experience of it. But I think it was really important for me going back last year. So I went back for 4 months or so, um, to see if I could live out there again. And I think I sort of decided that, because all our friends from my friends from university at Beijing Film Academy, none of them were really friends as a unit anymore. They were sort of friends still, but individually. And I was going to have to build my own friendship group over again. And everything was just going to require such emotional and sort of energy outlay to do all of these things. I was having to pick up my Chinese again from the massive cliff that had fallen off. And I just sort of realized that, yeah, I think I was more um, married to this sense of adventure and doing something challenging what I had. Well, so I was young and I had the energy to do it. And, you know, not wanting to go along with the route that had been preordained for me. It was sort of a sense of reasserting my own sense of free will. I think my whole China Odyssey. Um, and but I think we look back and as you're right, we were students, and I think that whole experience we see through rose-tinted goggles because we had no responsibilities, we had the safety net of education. So I think we were always going to have a good time, really.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Maybe what we could talk about is your experience as a DP. I mean, I don't know if you wanna, since I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I was also kind of interested to know what you thought of the program that you studied in China once you entered the master degree,
Oh, sure.
because I didn't know much about what was going on except for the classes we had in common. But do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about that? Like, how did you, what did you think about the classes, and did you have a good time there?
I had a great time at the university. I thought the classes were awful. Um, I thought they were like shockingly bad. I was a master's student at an arts university, and I did not have a single opportunity to have an interaction with anyone. There was no organized space where I could either say what I thought about a piece of art to a classmate or to a professor at any stage. So we had lectures and we were told things, and then we'd have seminars where we were told things and there were less people there. And that was the difference. And my experience with my 导师, so my supervisor, um, were pretty straightforward. So I had to write a 500 character synopsis for a story, so a log line for a story, and that's a roughly equivalent in English words. So very short, basically just saying what happens. And I think my first 11 attempts at this were rejected without comment, along the lines of do it better. And I think after the 12th one, I was called in for a meeting with him, and he said, and I'm not actually paraphrasing here. I am translating, but not paraphrasing. He said, "You none of the characters or any of the decisions they've made in any of the synopses that you've submitted so far make any logical sense. This is because you write based on your own subjective view of the world, which is wrong. I know what is good objectively, so you should listen to what I say." A fantastic detail during this is that Douban, which is the Chinese IMDb, I originally thought that was a star rating out of 5. That's because I'd only at that time looked at my Daoshi's Douban, and his highest rated film, I think, was a 3.1. And this is a man that told me in a very deadpan way that he knew what was good objectively. And what I really love about that interaction is that he's so accidentally and really succinctly defined what art is. It is someone's subjective view of the world. And I just found that so shocking. And I think a really telling moment of our time at BFA was, I think the president, I can't remember, is he called the chairman? But we were hosting that film festival, which I think you were working as a translator at. And in the opening ceremony, he said, this is a, did he say it's an art house? Like this is a university for art house films, and everyone bursts out laughing. It is all good towards doing your like job as a job. It's and but you can really understand that, I think, with the economic trajectory that China has had, that people do rest on their laurels a lot less, and you can understand it when you are the first generation that has been able to live as you do in comfort and as a sort of part of middle class society. And I sort of suspect that that's where he was coming from, that he was very proud of this thing, that he had made a career for himself doing this thing. And I think what he was really probably trying to say, if I try and give him some credit, which I don't want to do because I don't really like him, but would be that he was just telling me that that is how you are going to be employed more if you write it this way and you just keep your feet in line.
And did that happen? Did you get some job experiences after your graduation or like within your time in as a student?
Um, Not through here. And I certainly didn't get any for writing, which I never wanted to do. It was another strange thing that they sort of assumed that everyone wanted to be an auteur filmmaker at the university,
Mhm.
and none of it was geared towards collaboration, which, especially in the context of our conversation about China and the collective generally, that's a bizarre thing, really, that I just wanted to be a cinematographer, but I was not allowed to find a director for my film. I would have to do both, and I'd also have to write it. And these are things that I wasn't interested in. But yeah, in terms of working out in China, that's what I really learned. It was working on classmates' projects, or I had some commercial experience. I there was a prof he later started teaching at the university, but his name was Wayne. Who's a great guy, and he yeah, we had a shoot in Hainan. We shot a tourist ad for that. So I managed to do a bit of traveling. Um, at one point, I'd lost my passport, actually, and you get a yellow emergency slip that allows you to do everything that a passport does if you've ever lost a passport out in China. Um, and we were filming this small mining town as part of a graduation project. And on the first day I arrived in this province, I think it was Gansu, and the police sort of asked for another photocopy of my passport. And the next day they said, okay, thank you. Now we would like to see this. And every day they'd ask for a different piece of documentation for me. And we kept them at bay for a whole week. And I think we had a couple of shooting days left, which ironically we were going to be shooting in the police headquarters. um, and they said, you need to leave. I got a message from the pass on through the producer about 3 p.m. saying, you need to be out of the province by midnight, otherwise we will arrest you. So I ended up getting a police escort to the train station and put on the last train. But what was really fun is that I was pulling focus on this project, and it's a wireless device which has a range of about 500 feet. So if they had put me in jail, I still would have been able to do my job. So, because that's where we were filming all day. Um, but yeah, luckily I wasn't asked to do that.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I'm happy that you get all this like hand-in experience, and I wanted to ask you also about like the part of the aspect of the job that you like the most when you're on set.
Oh, I think that's pretty easy. I think it's you're with a group of eccentrics, really, and people who have a very localized interest in this one thing that they do. I think the beauty of film is that it combines every art form, and on set you have a specialist in each one. And so many people come into film from through different routes. I think is we are testament to, and I'm sure any filmmakers on your podcast will be as well. And that's such a joy that you then get to, oh, on longer form stuff, you'll be with them for 3 weeks, and you're just a sort of, you'll meet these people and you'll never spend, more than 5 minutes out of their company for all this time. And it's this sort of unique sort of suffering, that a bonding experience that you'll go through together, all towards the same goal. And I think that's a really fun and beautiful thing. Um, but yeah, there's the creative satisfaction as well. Obviously, there's all the other things that go along with it. But I think I feel most alive when I'm meeting new people, and I love that film can do that. I love stepping back, taking a moment, saying, what are the sequence of decisions I had to make to lead me to this exact moment? And I think that's part of the reason that I miss the transience of Chinese life.
Mm. And in terms of the role of a DP, when you are on set with a, let's say, a Chinese crew, even though I know you had like many experiences with a diversity of crew that were not necessarily like fully Chinese, but
Mm.
have you been able to identify some major difference in terms of expectation that, let's say, people have towards a DP when it comes to Chinese films, and then the role as a DP outside of China?
Um, yeah, so I think I can only speak to my own experiences here. And that because I'm working with a small pool of experiences, they're going to be quite generalized. But I think a few things are that working in the UK on the lower budget levels, you sort of need to have your own kit in order to work. And most of your crews have all gone through film school. So everyone has gone through quite a formal education to get where they are, and they sort of typically work their way up through that. Whereas in working in China, you're working with crews that are, um, yeah, more akin to manual labor, really. And I think it's maybe easier as a DP in China to not have too much grounding in the technical side of lighting. So that's a big responsibility of the cinematographer. So you're responsible for you'll be involved in the shot listing, and but on set you're then involved with the lighting team and the camera department, controlling camera moves, deciding lenses and framing and that sort of thing. For anyone that's not sort of too familiar with the job. And I think a big difference as well, just in terms of how you interact with your crew on set, is because working in China, you're working with usually much bigger lighting teams. And so you'll be working with the gaffer, who is the chief lighting technician. And you can get away with not having too much background in lights in China because they just sort of do their own thing. You can talk in very like broad brushstrokes to them and then communicate it to their team. They always work together and they always come from the same province and can speak a secret dialect. And something that I've noticed is, and apparently is very consistent, is that you have to get cross with them on the first set. Otherwise, they just start doing their own thing. And you sort of have to give them a telling off. And then they start listening to what you say. And that's different to the UK, I think. Um, but yeah, in terms of general expectations from producers or directors, I wouldn't really say it's too different. It just depends. You're working with people all the time, so I think most of the differences between the two are just in the people that populate those crews. But yeah, there's lots of work culture, the WeChat work culture that exists all throughout China. Yeah, it also applies to film crews. So yeah, that's one where if you're booked for a day, expect to work for the whole day. I've worked a 22-hour day in China before. And after that, we were still expected to have a meeting in a hotel room about what could go on the next day. And the meetings, you don't really have those meetings, I don't think, in the West.
Hmm,
Mm,
I see. Yeah. Recently, I had the opportunity to join a film shooting in Montreal,
mm,
which was quite interesting because it was shot by a Chinese director, but the
mm,
DP was from Montreal, a Quebec woman, and both of them were women. And so we had this big crew of like 50 people, and most of them were all from Quebec.
mm,
And what I it was like my first experience being on set outside of China, basically. And
mm,
um and what I realized, it was like the DP, she was involved in like all the decisions. Like it was quite stunning to observe, because she would be with the director even before shooting to work on storyboards. And then she would be also the one who decides if we have enough takes, or if we need to make another one, if she wants to have another angle on the situation, like all these kind of things. And I was curious to ask you if it's something that you enjoy, being like super involved in like all this kind of decision, or do
mm.
you kind of see your work as more of someone who's like gonna be um, answering the decision, and kind of like going along the way of the vision of the director? Or do you also enjoy this very collaborative aspect of being a DP on set?
So love being involved in the shortlisting process. I always want to be involved in a project as early as possible. I think it's frustrating when you come up with an idea for a story that the script then doesn't support. You sort of want to get involved whilst there's still wiggle room there in terms of scheduling and locations, and to be involved in that way. But I think equally that's the beauty of the job, really, is that you are, when it comes down to it, an enabler. You're there to put someone else's vision into pictures, into reality. And I think there's a real beauty to that. I think you have to get inside someone's mind, and it's a different person each time. And that means that the work is always varied, it's always different. And I think if I was to direct things, I think firstly, I don't really feel as though I've got anything burning to say. I don't think that being a director is something that you can just pick up as a hobby just because you want to try it out. I think it's this lifetime vocation. It's something that you need to know that you want to do. And I've never had that burning desire. So I think that I find real satisfaction in being this library of techniques, which I think a cinematographer should be. You're not meant to have your own style. You're meant to be able to adapt to the situation and know what's going to be best to sell a feeling. And for the same way, I think that's why anything that isn't narrative becomes a bit, I wouldn't say soul sappy, but you start to feel that you're a technician rather than an artist. I think as soon as you're selling a concept say cool or a product as in good or useful rather than an emotion, you feel like a technician because it's selling an emotion that is so nuanced and selling relationships between people and all of those things. And I love theorizing about the different ways that you can do that through visual language. A lot of it won't work, and a lot of it you're only really talking about so that you have something to say when someone interviews you when you win your award. Um, so, but the fact that you have thought about it, I think, is meaningful, and the fact that you are trying things, I think, is really important in any vocation, but especially in art. Mm.
Absolutely, yeah. And maybe to finish up, I wanted to ask you if you had any recommendation for people that may be listening in terms of, like it can be pieces of art, artists, or even some experience that you had in China.
So, I think my favorite Chinese film is Suzhou, which is
Mm.
Suzhou River.
Sucho
Um,
River. Mhm.
And there's another one that I like, which is Taiwanese, but it's a sorry. There's another one that I like, which is a Taiwanese film. It's by, and I don't know the tones for this. It's by Tsai Ming-liang, and it's What Time Is It There? And I think that's a really beautiful film as well. Um, but I think my favorite films leave you with a sense of atmosphere. They're not plot driven, and they leave you, yeah, just with a sense of magical realism, I suppose. Whenever I go back to watch my favorite films, I never really remember what happens. And yeah, What Time Is There is more, it's very slow cinema. So if you do follow
Mm.
that recommendation, just be prepared to for nothing to happen for about.
Mm.
But I think it's nice when a film gives you space to be reflective.
Yeah, maybe we can say that on the narrative point of view, or like maybe the plot, there's not much happening, but then there's so much more happening in the frame, or like, visually, or like with the ambience and stuff. But I was curious to ask you about, so the director who made Suzhou Ye.
Mm.
Have you seen his last movie about COVID?
I haven't actually. So the last film that I saw was the one with the really long title, which are Wind and Rain or something.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. The thing with the rain and the clouds and something like that, like, which was more like a
It
more of
starts
a like.
it starts with a big riot, but that was good. But no, is it should I watch the COVID one?
So I haven't watched it, but I heard that it's pretty good, and it was shown in Cannes this year, and
Mm.
it has gotten a lot of applause. I have seen some videos of people watching it in Cannes. It has only got like a few screenings, but people were like crazy, like, standing, clapping with both their hands, and I mean, yeah, you always clap with both your hands, but
What's it? Is that ever not standing ovation in Cannes? Does that happen?
yeah, and it's funny because the movie didn't get much promotion. Like many people were trying to kind of like hide it from, the big official instances and stuff. So, but yeah, people are saying that it's excellent, and it seems to be very also in a very interesting way, or interesting way of shooting, because it's kind of like, half a documentary but also a little bit of narrative. So I haven't watched it, but I'm very curious about it.
No. Yeah, I'll check it
Mm.
out.
Cool. And yeah, do you have any plans to go back to China in the near future?
I don't have any lined up. So I managed to get a 3-year tourist visa. So I went back a couple of months ago, quite recently. So I went to Guangzhou to film a short film, which was a great experience, but it was 40-degree heat, full summer, and we were filming 8-year-olds playing basketball. So it wasn't the best thought out project of all time. Um, but it was great being back. And we were filming in a demolition site basically. So it was this town that was in the middle of being destroyed, and it had the big chai characters everywhere. and we weren't really allowed to be there. And a man poked his head over the wall and said, "What are you filming?" And I think we responded to just saying TikToks. And he said he looked at the camera that I was holding and said, "No, you're not. Your camera's too big." And then he looked up at me and making unflinching eye contact said, "And who's that foreigner? He looks really strange." 看来很奇怪. Which is quite fun. But yeah, I think it was interesting going back that time because I think it was the first time that I had been back in China where I felt a little bit homesick. I'd never felt that before. But I think going back this time was the first time I'd gone back knowing that, I it's no longer this realm of infinite possibility. I know that the rest of my life isn't going to be there. And I loved going back, but I think I know now that I'm not going to go back to live. But I've got plans. In an ideal world, I'll go back every year for a project or two. But we'll see how that works. Unfortunately, it's not really how film works. You sort of have to stay in the same place and keep those connections going. Um, like China, film is all 靠关系, all about
Yeah,
that.
it's
Mm,
very key point. And about your last question about
mm,
your recent experience in Guangzhou, is
mm.
it can you tell us a little bit about how did this happen? Do you think it happened because of the demo reel you managed to have over the years? Did it happen because you knew the right person at the right time? Did the fact that you spoke Chinese help?
So I knew the director because she had posted on, it was through Beijing Film Academy. So there's a big
Mhm.
WeChat group with all the people who've gone through the uni, really. There are 500 people on it. And she posted saying, "Is there anyone in Britain?" And I am the only British person to have gone through the cinematography program. Um, so she was a bit of a captive audience originally. But we filmed quite a big commercial last year, which was a chaotic experience. We had the orchestra was 80 people strong, and we had a crew of I think 40. So I was leading a camera crew of, I think, 35. It's the most people I've ever been responsible for. And we did not have an on-set translator. I was tasked with being the translator, and the clients were Japanese, and there were 10 of them, but they only had they only had a Japanese to English translator, I think. So and we had a bit of kit not work on that first day, and I was summoned to this marquee because our gimbal for the keeps the camera steady wasn't working. And I was told that they've got something to say to you, and the translator says it to me in English. They're not very happy with you. And then the Chinese producer says to me, "What did they say?" And I had to translate my own telling off to the producer, which was so humiliating. And they said, "We're not happy with you, and we want to have a meeting afterwards." Luckily, we managed to get the day done okay, and I basically ended up having to help with the producing side of things, and the producer Ping is great, and so she brought me onto that job out in Guangzhou. So yeah, so I guess through the university, I guess that's the only time that it's ever been helpful for me since I've come back. I've got a sad line on my resume that says I can speak a bit of Chinese, but no one ever reads that, Val.
No, I mean, just being on the WeChat group and being able to, yeah, to read some Chinese, and I feel like you're always being very critical towards your Chinese, but you're actually pretty good, and yeah, I'm very happy to hear about the all these kind of crazy experiences, and yeah, the humor also that you bring to them. So I feel like you're the right person for the job.
Thank you. Tell that. Do you mind popping that in an email to the Japanese clients?
I
Um,
wonder. I wish I could have listened to your translation of the telling of see how you translated that in Chinese.
Oh, that's a good question. I think I made it slightly milder. They say that I'm doing a great job. Yeah, I think maybe I just like pull very strange but like facial expressions. Uh no, but I think yeah, with film, I think it's just about being on set as much as you can, and you just need to show up on time, be nice to people, and I think the idea is that people keep employing you. But everyone's unemployed at the moment. Scary times in the UK film industry, I think, and I think it was one of the conversation topics I think we were going to have, but it was um making it abroad as a DP, I think is hard because it is all contact based, and I've had a lot of the English guys that actually don't speak Chinese asking me, I keep reading about the Chinese film industry booming and should I go over there to work? And I think that is just this idea of the grass being greener on the other side. That if things aren't going well for you somewhere, that you just want to completely jump ship and go to the other. But I think perseverance is key. It's the boring answer. I don't think there are silver bullets in any part of life, and certainly going to China isn't one of them. You've got to work hard at this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. But but hopefully, yeah, hopefully things are gonna improve after the I feel like probably what's happening now is that we had this huge bubble with COVID, and then suddenly a huge yeah jump up the cliff, and then now we are kind of still like suffering from that. But yeah, I'm really hoping that things are gonna get better and that you get many exciting projects all around the world.
Yeah, well, likewise.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really great talking to you, and I hope we get to catch up sooner than this time next time.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.